If you're left-handed, I probably don't need to tell you that the world wasn't built for you. You figure that out pretty quickly the first time you try to use a pair of cheap scissors, or when you drag the side of your hand across fresh ink in a spiral notebook. Almost every piece of heavy machinery, every car console, every power tool, and every video game controller is aggressively tailored to a right-handed majority. And for a long time, the right-handed majority wasn't exactly nice about it either. Historically, being left-handed was treated with intense suspicion. If you look at the origins of our language, it's practically baked into the vocabulary. The English word sinister literally comes from the original Latin word for left. The French word for left is gauche, which we use today to describe someone who is socially awkward or clumsy. Right up until a few decades ago, left-handed children in schools were routinely punished. Teachers would physically tie a kid's left hand behind their back and force them to write with their right hand until they adapted. But human bias and annoying scissors are nothing compared to the actual biological puzzle of handedness. If you dig into the archaeological record, you'll find that early human ancestors were already making stone tools specifically designed for right-handed grips over 2 million years ago. And today, if you look across almost every single recognized culture, isolated tribe, and geographic region on the planet, the ratio of handedness is practically locked in stone. Roughly 90% of humans are right-handed. Exactly 10% are left-handed. For an evolutionary biologist, that 10% figure is a massive statistical headache. Evolution usually operates on some pretty straightforward math. If a genetic trait gives an animal a huge survival advantage, the animals with that trait live longer, they have more kids, and eventually the trait spreads until the entire species has it. On the flip side, if a trait actively gets you killed or makes it harder for you to survive, it gets violently scrubbed from the gene pool. The individuals who carry it die off, and the trait drops to zero. And if a trait is completely neutral, meaning it doesn't help you, but it doesn't hurt you either, the population should naturally split down the middle. It should be a 50-50 coin toss. Handedness isn't 50-50, and it hasn't dropped to zero. Natural selection has actively maintained this exact 90-10 ratio for hundreds of thousands of years. Why? To figure that out, we first have to kill a very old myth. For a long time, researchers assumed handedness was just a cultural habit. The thinking was that you watched your parents use their right hands, so you just naturally copied them. But modern science has completely debunked that. Being left or right-handed is deeply physically hardwired into your biology long before you even take your first breath. In fact, it happens before your brain is even connected to your body. Biologists have discovered that between just 8 and 12 weeks of pregnancy, the left and right sides of a fetus's developing spinal cord begin to express genes completely differently. The spine actually rigs the motor circuitry to favor one side before the brain even has a say. It's in the DNA. For years, scientists looked for one single left-handed gene, but recent massive genomic studies in 2025 and 2026 proved it's a huge team effort. Handedness is driven by over 40 different gene variants, specifically tubulin genes, which act as the microscopic scaffolding that physically shapes our cells as we grow. So why did evolution program the vast, overwhelming majority of us to favor the right side? Well, look at animals that aren't human. If you go into the wild and watch a group of chimpanzees or gorillas, you'll see them using their hands quite a bit. They crack open nuts with rocks. They fish for termites using sticks. But unlike humans, chimpanzees don't have a 90-10 ratio. The primate world is generally split right down the middle. Half are lefties, half are righties. The reason humans broke away from that 50-50 split, it comes down to two massive evolutionary shifts: walking on two legs and talking. In May 2026, a landmark study from the University of Oxford looked at over 2,000 primates to solve this exact mystery. They found that when our ancestors stood upright, it completely freed our hands from being used for walking. That created an intense new evolutionary pressure for specialized hand use. Right around the same time, our brains rapidly expanded and we developed complex language. Your brain is lateralized, meaning certain high-level tasks are processed strictly on one side. For most people, the left hemisphere is the control center for language and speech. Both talking and crafting tools require intense, rapid-fire cognitive processing. Neuroscientists believe evolution took a shortcut. It clustered these high-energy tasks, language, speech, and fine motor skills, tightly together into the left hemisphere to maximize processing speed. And because a weird quirk of anatomy means the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, the human species became overwhelmingly right-handed. That neurological shortcut made right-handedness the default setting for human biology. And in a prehistoric hunter-gatherer tribe, being born with that default setting gave you a massive advantage. Early humans survived the Ice Age and apex predators through intense, synchronized cooperation. You had to share literally everything to stay alive. If your entire tribe uses identical right-handed spears, right-handed flint axes, and right-handed cutting tools, it creates a seamless survival economy. Anyone can pick up a fallen friend's weapon and instantly defend themselves without missing a beat. Beyond that, making ancient tools was actually a highly precise science. When a tribe sat around a fire knapping flint to make arrowheads, a right-handed strike flakes the stone in a very specific, predictable direction. If a left-handed napper picks up that same coarse stone and hits it from the opposite angle, it creates a completely different flake pattern. They would essentially ruin the tool for the rest of the right-handed tribe. Their weapons wouldn't match the group's standardized hunting equipment. In a prehistoric world, where a fraction of a second means the difference between taking down a wild boar or starving to death, being a left-handed outlier in a right-handed hunting party was a serious mechanical liability. The pressure to conform was immense. Under the brutal rules of cooperative survival, left-handers shouldn't exist. They should have been bred out of the population entirely. But humans don't just cooperate, we also fight. In 2005, a team of French evolutionary biologists named Dr. Charlotte Faury and Dr. Michel Raymond were looking at this exact puzzle, and they proposed a groundbreaking idea called the fighter hypothesis. They realized that while being left-handed was a terrible disadvantage when you were trying to share tools with your friends, it was an absolute lethal cheat code when you were trying to kill your enemies. Picture two ancient warriors squaring off in hand-to-hand combat. Because 90% of the population is right-handed, a right-handed warrior spends his entire life sparring, training, and fighting against other right-handed people. His brain is completely neurologically hardwired to anticipate a punch, a swing, or a spear thrust coming from his opponent's right side. He knows exactly how to angle his shield. He knows exactly where to step to dodge the attack. A left-handed warrior is perfectly prepared for this fight too. Because he lives in a right-handed world, he has also spent his entire life fighting right-handed opponents, but the right-handed guy is completely blind to what is about to happen. When the left-hander attacks, the strike comes from a completely backward, totally unexpected angle. The right-hander's defensive muscle memory is entirely useless. His shield is in the wrong place. His footing is wrong. In life or death prehistoric combat, that split-second element of surprise is usually all it takes to win. This isn't just some abstract theory about cavemen. The fighter hypothesis is backed up by hard data. and you can actually watch this ancient combat advantage play out on live television today. Left-handers make up just 10% of the general population, but they massively dominate elite one-on-one sports. In professional fencing, tennis, and baseball, lefties frequently make up 30 to 50% of the top-ranked athletes. If you watch combat sports like boxing or MMA, fighting a southpaw is notoriously frustrating. Right-handed fighters simply aren't programmed to block strikes coming from a left-handed stance. But Forey and Raymond didn't just look at sports. They actually traveled to remote modern-day tribal societies that still engage in frequent violent physical conflict, like the Yanomami people in South America. They found a direct, chilling mathematical correlation. The higher the murder rate and the more violent the society, the higher the percentage of left-handed people surviving and passing on their genes in that population. The rules of ancient tribal warfare are still actively dictating human genetics. But this introduces the final and most important piece of the puzzle. If being left-handed makes you a lethal fighter, and winning fights allows you to survive and pass on your genes, why didn't left-handers just multiply? Why didn't they take over the world? Why are they eternally capped at 10%? It all comes down to a brilliant biological principle called frequency-dependent selection. In biology, frequency-dependent selection means that the survival value of a genetic trait depends entirely on how rare it is. The left-handed combat advantage only works because nobody expects it. If left-handers were highly successful and kept having kids until they made up 50% of the population, their evolutionary advantage would instantly vanish. Right-handers would spend half their time fighting left-handers. Their brains would adapt, their muscle memory would adjust, and the element of surprise would be completely gone. Evolution has locked human-handedness into a permanent, unyielding mathematical stalemate. If the left-handed population drops too low, say down to 2 or 3%, those few remaining lefties gain a massive, highly unpredictable advantage in combat. They easily defeat their right-handed rivals. They survive, they reproduce, and they push their population numbers back up. But if their numbers rise too high, say they hit 15 or 20%, they lose the element of surprise. The combat advantage evaporates, and suddenly, the cooperative disadvantages of living in a right-handed world start to weigh them down, pushing their numbers right back down to the equilibrium point. For hundreds of thousands of years, natural selection has perfectly balanced these two opposing forces. The intense pressure to share tools, coordinate hunts, and build cooperative societies pushes the human race toward the right, but the brutal, unavoidable reality of human conflict protects the left. That 10% ratio is the exact mathematical equilibrium where those two forces collide. So if you are left-handed and you find yourself struggling to use a cheap pair of right-handed scissors, or you're bumping elbows with someone at a crowded dinner table, don't curse your genetics. You aren't a biological mistake. You aren't a glitch in the system, and you aren't just a quirk of habit. You are the direct result of a highly sophisticated, millions of years old biological strategy. Natural selection intentionally preserved your neurological wiring to serve as a standing army of wildcards. Because in the brutal, unpredictable game of human survival, the greatest advantage you can possibly have is being exactly what the world doesn't expect.